Welcome back to room 303 in Junior English, and we now turn in your hymnals to pages 1352, 1353 and following. Naomi Shihab Nye's poem, Streets. Let's learn a little bit about Naomi Shihab Nye quickly on page 1352. She was born in 1952. She is an Arab-American poet who spent her teenage years in Jerusalem. I'm reading now with you on 1352. Far from the cities of St. Louis, Missouri and San Antonio, Texas, where she had been a child. Her father had immigrated from Palestine and settled in St. Louis, where he and his wife opened stores specializing in imported goods. When Naomi was 14, the family moved back to Jerusalem to be near her father's Arab relatives. Nye says the family's years in Jerusalem enabled her to discover her heritage. The other heading here is Poetry for the Everyday. In addition to publishing award-winning volumes of poetry, Nye has also written picture books for children. This versatile writer, whose work is built on the sturdy foundation of everyday experiences, believes that, quote, the primary source of poetry has always been local life, random characters met on the streets, our own ancestry sifting down to us through small, essential daily tasks, end quote. And then I love this quote here, the primary source of poetry has always been local life. The idea that the most important things that ever happen in life are always going to be the stuff that happens in the normal life, the streets, if you will. So let's take a look now at this poem, Streets, and we'll again ask about social commentary. What point do you believe that is being made by Nye in this poem? All right, let's read along, and then we'll just work at level 1 to start with, and summary. Streets.
Streets by Naomi Shihab Nye. A man leaves the world, and the streets he lived on grow a little shorter. One more window dark in this city, the figs on his branches will soften for birds. If we stand quietly enough evenings, there grows a whole company of us standing quietly together. Overhead loud grackles are claiming their trees, and the sky, which sows and sows, tirelessly sowing, drops her purple hem. Each thing in its time, in its place. It would be nice to think the same about people. Some people do. They sleep completely, waking refreshed. Others live in two worlds, the lost and remembered. They sleep twice, once for the one who is gone, once for themselves. They dream thickly, dream double. They wake from a dream into another one. They walk the short streets calling out names, and then they answer.
Now this is an interesting little poem that will lead to some challenging questions about how we deal with passing, how we deal with death. As we have said several times in our conversations together, the difference between you and a fly is you know about fly swatters. And a poem like this will remind us that when someone dies, there are others that remain who have to continue to live on. And how you do that has something to do with what kind of person you are and what kind of person it was who left, who died. But I want to begin at level 1. And let's go ahead and just work through the poem quickly as we ask, what exactly is it that's going on in the poem? First of all, notice the opening line. A man leaves the world is, of course, going to be metaphoric for someone dies. And the streets he lived on grow a little shorter. Jot down at level 1 what you think that means. When someone dies, the streets they live on grow a little shorter means what? Well, some have argued that what that means is one less person lives on that street, making that street then a little less full. Some people have said that the streets we're talking about here is not a physical street, but a metaphoric street. In other words, once the person is gone, people's lives are not as full. People's lives are more empty. One more window dark in this city. The figs on his branches will soften for birds. The idea here is what he's left behind is somehow all that remains of him. And of course we would say she as well, for men or for women, the same is the case. Someone you love who dies leaves a huge hole, of course. If we stand quietly enough evenings, there grows a whole company of us standing quietly together. We might see the word picture here. As someone dies, there are large numbers of people's lives who begin to be affected. And a lot of times we don't realize the ripple effect of the passing of a life until it happens. Recently in our community, didn't we? We lost someone who is very beloved by a large numbers of people. And the ripple effect of that is starting to be felt, obviously. Overhead, loud grackles are claiming their trees. And the sky, which sows and sows, tirelessly sowing, drops her purple hem. What a beautiful way to say that an ending, it's like a life is like a single day, and when the life leaves the world, then it's like the end of the day. Now we're on to page 1354. Each thing in its time. We will think here, of course, of that famous passage in the Bible from the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm making a 3A observation, allusion here. That there is a time for everything, a time for living and a time for dying, a time for war, a time for peace. We have the same game being played here in our poem. Each thing in its time, in its place. It would be nice to think the same about people. In other words, we all kind of have to live with mortality. We have to live with the fly swatter. We have to live with the fact that we are not the only ones who live and die, but everybody else on this planet does as well. And of course, for the people who are closest to us, the challenge, obviously, is how you deal with that. The next part of the poem, the end of the poem, raises the question of how people live with passing, with death. Some people do. Right? They sleep completely, waking, refreshed. There's basically two ways to deal with loss. One is you get on with your life. They live, they died, I'm left behind, so be it. There are some people who can just move on after a death. Others live in two worlds. Now, I've had students that say, this may be some of the most compelling language that poems that we've written, poetic lines that we've read, because I've gone through an experience where I lost someone very, very close to me, and I had to deal with this fact that while I couldn't believe other people got on so quickly after the loss, after the death, got on so quickly with their life. One student reporting, my mom seemed to get on a lot more quickly than I could, living in two worlds, the lost and remembered. What a compelling line. When you lose someone that you really care about, you can live in two worlds. The past, right? The remembered, everything of the past. And then the future that will never include that person, the lost. Where you find yourself saying, man, I would love to have had this experience I'm having right now with. You know what I'm saying? Oftentimes we have to deal with this when we lose our parents later in our life as adults, and then we have to kind of say, I wish they could have been here when I had my first child, and they could have seen blah, 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 blah. You see what I'm saying? That's this point of the lost and the remembered. Let's keep going. They sleep twice. Once for the one who is gone, once for themselves. In other words, they're always thinking about the individual who's gone. They dream thickly, dream double. They wake from a dream into another one. They walk the short streets. We're back to the opening line about when someone dies, the street is shortened. Calling out names. And then they answer. In other words, because the person is so powerfully alive in the mind, it's as if the person is still there in memory, and yet still there. We'll, in a moment when we get to 3A, talk about Alfred Lord Tennyson, the great British poet that we will read as seniors. And he wrote a famous collection of poems called In Memoriam, because he lost his closest pal. And the series of poems are so compelling. In that, however, he counsels himself by saying, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." Talking about the loss of someone who you love. Let's jump to 2A really quickly. What are major messages and themes here that we want to write down? Jot down what for you is the major message of this poem. Some have said that it is death is a profound ripple effect, and you don't know how you're going to experience the fly swatter, to continue with our word picture, until it actually happens. Some people have pointed out that this poem is actually saying there's two ways to deal with loss and death. One is to get on with your life. The other is to struggle, to go through the process of grieving for long periods of time, wishing that the person was still here, and trying to find some way to deal with that. What is the way that we deal with that? Finally, some students have pointed out the idea of the streets. Life is about streets. Life is about people who live on streets, who walk down streets, who drive down streets. Notice what streets do. Think about the powerful word picture. What do streets do? They connect us, right? To go from the high school to Blair's, you have to go on streets that connect us. Our life is like streets. We're all connected to each other in ways we often don't fully appreciate or understand. Notice, for example, the question on 1354 under literary analysis, social commentary. Does the speaker belong to the group of some people or to the group of others? This is interesting. In other words, you can get a sense that the speaker in our poem is about understanding the loss. And as we'll read next year as seniors, another 3A observation, John Donne in his famous Meditation 17 will say, no man is an island entire the main. We're all somehow connected to each other. And the loss of one person means the loss of all of us in some kind of important way. Okay, at 2B, we can obviously make some observations about the powerful word picture of the streets and the ways in which the street is a metaphor that is connecting us. Some students love as well that word picture on 1353 at the very end. The sky which sows and sows, tirelessly sowing, drops her purple hem. It's the end of the day. Many people have tried to come up with the best word picture to describe death and dying. Some people really like this idea about the end of the day, nighttime coming on. When we study in your senior year John Keats, I'm making a lot of 3A observations, aren't I? When we study John Keats, we'll have to pay attention to the way in which Keats came to realize very early in his life, at a very young age, that he was soon to die. And then he started writing these famous poems, When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be, and Ode to a Nightingale, and Ode on a Grecian Urn. And in all of these poems, he's coming to terms with the fact that he knows very soon that the sky will drop her purple hem. So back to the Nye lines. Okay, well, let's ask about, at 3A, how we relate to this. What is your poem, or your song, or your movie that most speaks to you about loss and about death? What is for you, on your playlist of all those songs that you have, if you were to lose the person closest to you, what song would maybe give you the most comfort? You could listen to it, and it maybe would help you to be able to deal with it. What song for you, or what video for you, or what video game for you, or what movie for you, or what poem, or what story, or what novel for you speaks closest to you about loss and death, and how people have to get on with living and dying. We've already mentioned a number of classic titles as well, and classic authors as well. Tennyson's In Memoriam is a powerful statement of what it's like to lose someone close to you. I certainly recommend it to you. Of course, at 3B, we have to ask some powerful questions about the fly swatter. How do you live loving people, but not fearing the knowledge that they might leave before you do? How do you live with that? How do you go on every day with your life? Many have argued that the best way to do that is what is being suggested here in this poem, to be able to respect and love those who have already come and gone. The challenge, of course, here is to appreciate the lives of the people we live with while we have them, to understand that our lives are all somehow connected by streets, and that with the passing of someone, our street just got shorter. We have one fewer person. Of course, this seems to suggest as well another important question. In what ways are you connected to others? How do you qualify your own life in this regards? The ways in which you kind of look at your life and say, these are the people who live on my street. Back to the 3A observation, a number of my juniors have said, when I was very young, the show of all shows for me was Sesame Street. The text that showed all the people who live on that street, whose lives are somehow interconnected. Tennyson will say it in his famous Ulysses, I am part of all that I have met. Well, there you go, Nye's classic metaphor of death and how we deal with it. Streets. Thank you.